Well, let's talk to Michael Stephens. He's a researcher at the Royal United Services Institute. He joins me live here on the set in Doha. Michael, some observers now say this is a war within a war, that this fight is now emerging as a battle between the moderates and the Islamists within the opposition. How do you see it?
I think it's actually more complicated than that. You have secular groups, you have moderate Islamists, you have hardline Islamists, and then you have jihadists. All of them have different ideologies. They've expressed those at many different times during this conflict, and we've seen a growing division over the last 18 months in particular, particularly between the jihadists and the moderate Islamists. The more secular groups seem to be fading into the background a little bit. So what's going on right now is that some of the strongest elements of the opposition to Bashar al-Assad militarily and ideologically are coming to blows, and it's starting to look as if there's an increasing hostility which is turning to conflict. Let's
just wind the clock back if we can, Michael, because just over a year ago we saw those jihadists pretty much operating underground in Syria. We'd heard about them, but not to the extent we have now. Now they're taking the FSA head on. How well equipped are they, and who's funding them? Where are they coming from?
Well, there's a different number of sources of funding which have emerged, particularly from the Persian Gulf area. There's definitely money coming from Kuwait, some from Saudi. It's not state-sanctioned, by the way. These tend to be individuals collecting at mosques and majlises and literally carrying bags of cash across the border. I've seen surface-to-air missiles being handed over. We're not sure how those got there. And so there's a number of different pathways that these extremists are getting weapons. It's very clear that they're becoming more organized. They're having more sort of international support. And not only that, what's interesting about the way that they're making these groups and appearing in sort of their televised addresses is to appeal to the wider region. And they're getting support from some pretty hardline clerics, including, by the way, Qaradawi obviously was urging people to go to jihad in Syria. And there are a number of other clerics in Saudi who have supported that. So there's a lot of support coming both ideologically and financially.
And let's remember that this fighting hugely impacts on the international support for the opposition. Countries who want to give money, they want to give support, they want to give weapons, won't or will be hesitant if those weapons are going to will fall into the hands of the jihadists.
Yeah, I mean the first big problem we had obviously was with this man Abu Sakar, who was filmed ripping out the heart of a Syrian soldier. That began a conversation which has since sort of snowballed into this. We're really very, very worried about some elements within the opposition. We're not sure if we should be giving money to certain groups, because if we do, could it end up in the hands of people who eventually want to turn those weapons upon us? What's interesting, actually, the British came out and said that the biggest worry they have now is these extremist groups getting their hands on sort of chemical weapons or advanced surface-to-air missiles, bringing them back to Europe after they've trained foreign jihadists and they could use it for a larger fight. So there's many different sort of permutations of this conflict, and these jihadists that are scaring a lot of people and sort of withholding promises of funding.
A final thought from him, Michael. So what are the options then open to the FSA? Do they take on the jihadists head-on? I mean, could it lead to all-out war? What happens next?
It depends on the locality they're fighting within, because there's very specific dynamics between moderate groups and extremist groups across Syria and how those play out. Sometimes they're very closely aligned. Sometimes they fight for resources. Other times it's simply because of ideology. The jihadist groups view them as secular kuffar, non-believers, and so they will always fight them. So it depends where you are, but I think the FSA in those areas where there is a true ideological difference, they're going to have no choice but to fight, and they're going to need support if they're going to win that battle.
All right, Michael Stephens, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.